Okay, all right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Lamed Hey. We began the sugya on Daf Lamed Daled on the base. A person put their eruv in a location and they physically don't have access to it during Bein Hashmashos. The Mishnah began neshamot b'migdal, and it's locked, and you lost the key. So the Mishnah quoted the machlokes between the Chachamim, the Tanach, and Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanach holds that it's always an eruv. Rabbi Eliezer says that if it's not pshat that you, like we explained at Ashba, that you always leave the key somewhere, and you currently forgot where the key's location is. That's also okay. But if you lost the key, you know you didn't put it in its usual place, and you don't know where it is. Rabbi Eliezer holds that Eino Yeruv. And we began asking, what's the logic? B'shitas Tanakama. That means that if you lost the key, you don't have access to the migdol, to the closet, you can't get it. Why would the Eruv be an Eruv? So we began yesterday learning the first approach, and that the Mishnah is not speaking about a solid closet, let's say made out of wood, which would mean that to get it without the key, you would have to break it. Can't be that because you can't break it. I'm going to come back to our Tosfos before we go on. Elama, before we go to the Tosfos, the first answer is that the Mishnah is speaking about the Migdal Shalavenim. It's a brick closet. And as the Gemara added the nuance where we left off, that it's bricks that were not cemented together. All you need to do to get to the eruv, if you don't have the key, is simply take out the bricks from a place. That is not called demolishing. That's not called stira. And therefore, the Chachamim hold, you have access to it. Kishitas Rav Meir, we're going to chazir a few more details in a moment. Before we go on, what's very important is to learn, let's begin before the intro, on Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis, to learn the third Tosfos in the Amid. Chavre, this is such a good chazara of many dinim that we learned in Masechta Shabbos. Tosfos asks, based on the Mishnah that we have Shabbos Kuf Mem Vav, towards the end. The Mishnah says that if you have, let's say, pressed or dried figs that are in a barrel, you are allowed to break the barrel on Shabbos to get to the figs. Why? Because there's a klal that ain't binyan v'stira b'kelim. And by the way, this is something very common nowadays. When you have a bag of potato chips, when you have food that's in a flimsy container, l'kula alma, I'm not talking about erasing letters, breaking through a container, not in a way of tikkun, in a way of kilkul, in a way that the container now becomes useless, is something that's permitted on all levels, even midrabanan. Even midrabanan, if you have without getting all to the details, that's the kasha that Tosfos says. So he doesn't understand the whole inyan over here. Why do we have to go into a place? You have a brick closet that is not cemented. There is a klal, ein binyan v'stira b'kelim. Answers Tosfos, it must be, and we're going to learn a lot more about this today in the Gemara, but from the beginning, that we're not speaking about a relatively smaller closet, which is a keli, but if you have a very large closet, Tosfos says, there we might apply the rule of yes, there is binyan and there is stira, and therefore the Gemara's kasha is a big kasha. And if it's a very large closet who you don't have access to because you lost the key, again, the first answer that we left off is b'migdal shalavenim. We're going to have today on Daf Lamed Hey two other ways of teaching the Mishnah. And from that, we're going to get into certain halachas of hesed, of zav, which are unique, which is a unique koyach of tumag to the zav. Well, not that unique, but quite unique, with very interesting concepts of what does it mean that if a zav moves something, even though the zav doesn't touch it, he moves it because he moves it with a stick. Pshute kleyates itself does never become tamei. Rashi says he moves it because he's wearing gloves. Then he will be matama it. What happens if something moves but it stays in its place? Like, what does movement mean? That's going to be a gavaldik chiddush that we're going to learn today. Does movement mean that it has to leave its location? Or what happens if he does something that makes an item shake, a closet shake? So it's moving, but it's not going anywhere. Is that called movement or not? Okay, now when we finish the sugya, three ways of understanding the Nesani B'migdal, we're going to have a new Mishnah on Daf Lamed Hey. Now, the sugya that we're going to learn on the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Hey is mamish asha sugya, We have this throughout. The issue here will be if a person for sure placed an eruv sometime before Bein Hashmashos, but there's going to be a suffix whether the eruv was still there or whether the eruv was still kosher during Bein Hashmashos. Just for example, a wind blew the eruv beyond the 2,000 amos. When you place an eruv, it has to be within 2,000 amos of where you physically are, because you have to at least potentially be able to get there. If you place the eruv 2,000 amos and a bit beyond where you physically are, even if you have kavanah to be kinda your makim shavisa with your eruv, it doesn't help. You can't get there. So what happens if you place the eruv right by that boundary of 2,000 amos, within it, but then the wind blew it away? You just don't know when. Or let's say you placed truma, the truma was tohaira. At a certain point, the truma became tameh, and we're going now. You can't do anything with truma tameya. You can't eat it, right? So, but you don't know when. That's called a suffix, whether the eruv was good or not. So you have a suffix, you have a chazaka. You placed it when you placed it before this man, before Bein Hashmashos, it was good. So, do we say that we follow the chazaka cheskas meikara? Do we say that we cannot follow the chazaka meikara? The Valdika question, and we're going to learn other cases throughout Shas where when you have a doubt, when are we allowed to use the concept of a chazaka? Chazaka here means since we knew before it was good, do we extend that chazaka as long as we could? Do we say that only by Dina Derabanan? Can we say it even by Dina Do'iraisa? We're going to learn about how to Bachlal view. Many times you have two contradictory witnesses, Shnei Kitei Edim, that are Makhishim Zedzeh. Do they cancel each other out? Do we say that when you have two Edim that are Makhishim, both are valid? I'm saying that because even according to those that say that a Chazaka could be used to resolve a suffix, even Do'iraisa, Chazaka can never be used against Edim. So if you have two Kitei Edim, if with you that if they say opposite testimonies that they don't exist halachically, they're canceled out, then you are, according to some opinions, allowed to use chazaka. But if we say that when you have two contradictory Edim, they both exist, even though no one will trump the other because each one is saying the opposite, but then chazaka for sure will not be allowed to be taken into account because chazaka can never go against Edim. These sugyas are mamish gavaldik. We're going to be learning a lot more, obviously, but let us start where we left off on Daf Lamed, Daled, on base. Let's go back to 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Okay, so answer number 1, like we said, is that we're speaking about a brick migdal. Hold on. Even a brick migdal, you're not allowed to demolish it. No. If it's not cemented together, you could take it apart. Still, the Gemara says, hold on, we quoted the Mishnah from Rav Meir. And guys, there's another issue here. What's the other issue? The issue is that even if there's no stira problem because it's not cemented together, bricks that were part of a closet, l'chu'ura, the kavana of the owner was that it should remain a closet. Those bricks are muktzah. Now, interestingly, being that for Yom Tiv, we can even cook and bake, etc., we also are more relaxed when it comes to muktzah if it's food related. So when we learned above that if you have a bias, not even a keli, a bias, and it's cement, it's brick, it's a brick house, not cemented, and there's food in there. So L'chatchila Rav Meir says you can take the bricks out to go get the food. We learned that's only for Yom Tiv. I know there's no stira, even by a bias, because it's not cemented together, but the bricks are muktzah. But in order for you to be able to get the food, there's no muktzah issue for Yom Tiv. Avolei b'Shabbos, coming back over here, even if there's no stira, how can the Chachamim say the eruv is an eruv? Because you can take the bricks apart. No, you cannot. The bricks are muktzah. So for that, Hachinami, the Gemara needed to say a big doichik. That according to this first approach that our Mishnah is speaking about Migdal Shalavenim, it's taka only Yantiv. That's already a doichik. We're learning Hilchos ERUVIN. We never differentiate. But still, that's the approach of these Amoraim, that only when there's no muktzah issue, because Yom Tiv, that's when there's no issue. The Tanach says that the eruv is an eruv. On Shabbos, the eruv would not be an eruv. So asks the Gemara, if our Mishnah, if this din is only for Yom Tiv, As it is usual that you have braises here at the Sefta that elaborate a din in the Mishnah. And we have a Tosefta that elaborates on our Mishnah, but the Tosefta is not elaborating on the Shita of the Tanakama. It's elaborating on the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer that we have in the Mishnah that says that no, if you taka lost the keys, then it's not an Eruv. And on that says more details. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer depends. In Be'ir Avad, if you lost the keys in the city, meaning Chevra, not in the Reshus Rabim, you know the keys are somewhere in a location where if you were to find it, you would not have a problem carrying it to the Migdal. Now this takes us back to the machloikas between the Chachamim and Abshimin as to, are you allowed to carry from one type of domain to another type of domain without an Eruv Chatzeres? We're speaking about non-biblical Reshus Rabim. So can I carry from my rooftop to your rooftop, or from my rooftop to your yard, or even from my yard to your yard? So Rab Shimon was very lenient by holding that when did Shlomo HaMelech say you have to make an Eruv Chatzeres only if the item that is being carried began in a house. So it went from my house to my backyard, now to go into your backyard, if we did not merge through an Eruv Chatzeres, midrabanan asur to do so. But if an item began out there in a chatzir, in a gag, in a katifa, in a non-reshus rabim area, so the issue here is not carrying in there because it's fine. You have to carry it from one ownership to another ownership. Rav Shimon holds it's not a problem. Says the Braisa, says the Tosefta, that when does Rabbi Eliezer say that in Be'ir Avad, Eruv is an Eruv, which is a big chiddush. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer holds that even though the keys are lost, if it's a case where if you were to find it, you would be halachically allowed to bring it to the closet and to open it, even though you did not find it. Another concept of potential, since potentially you can get it, then even Rabbi Eliezer will be made that the Eruv is an Eruv. When did Rabbi Eliezer say in the Mishnah that Eino Yeroid? That is when you know that you lost the keys, basada, meaning in a Reshus Rabim, meaning even if you were to find it, you can't carry it. That's where he says Eino Yeroid. So expands the Tosefta. He's elaborating the Rabbi Eliezer of the Mishnah. Now, what did we just sign? That our Mishnah is only on Yontif, not on Shabbos. On Yontif, my friends, we can carry in Reshus Rabim. The whole Tosefta doesn't fit with the Mishnah. Mali'ir, Mali Sada. Now, it would be a huge doichet just to learn how to learn Torah Shabbal Peh, to say that the Mishnah's version of Rabbi Eliezer is completely dissimilar to the Tosefta's version. Normally doesn't work that way. Normally we learn the Mishnah, that's the Iker Torah Shabbal Peh. Then when we find the Braises, the Toseftas, all other words of Torah Shabbal Peh, we link them and we understand them. They are normally more elaborate. Yeah, they are elaborating pratim that Rabbeinu HaKadosh was only meramis to in the Mishnah. But it doesn't merge together at all. Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says, no, we could reconcile the Tosefta with our Mishnah, and it must be that Chesura Mechsera V'Hachi Ketani. Now, Nesani b'Migdal, let's go Migdal Shel Levanim, and the Nol B'Fanav, and the Avar HaMafteach. All of this is the Tanakama, Hadeze Eruv, Lamed Varmonim B'Yamtiv. Why only B'Yamtiv? Shabbos and Yamtiv, if you have a brick closet that was not cemented together. Here we're going to hold there's no issue of demolition and a chanami, but there is a muksa issue that is waived on Yom Abel b'Shabbos ein Eruv Yeruv. I want to add another nuance. There's so many nuances here. Didn't we learn that the Rebbe holds that an Isur D'Rabbanan for Eruv is not a problem? Because since the Eruv only has to be accessible ben hashmoshes and ben hashmoshes, we don't care. First of all, we already did learn that even according to Rabbi, they're different than Rabbanans. We already had that. Most importantly, on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, I know it was a doichik, but when we had the first Mishnah, you don't have to turn the page. On Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, the Gemara said the Reisha Rabbi, the Sefer Rabbanan. The Mishnah we had on top of Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis doesn't follow Shitas Rabbi. It would be so. Therefore, it would be even a bigger doichik to say Rabbi Rabbanan Rabbi. So we do care about muksa. which is why on Shabbos that we're going with this flow. However, let's add the Chasudim Echsem. Nimtza Mafteach, Bein Be'ir, Bein Basada, Ein Eruvei Eruv, even if you found it, not potential, even if you found it, the Eruv is not an Eruv, because the Tanach does not subscribe to Rab Shimon. The Tanach holds that even carrying it from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid, you may not do so. If you may not do so, again, I know it's only an Isur D'Rabbanan, but we are going that if there is an Isur D'Rabbanan, then you can't use the Eruv. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, based on him subscribing to Rab Shimon, that's a lot more lenient when it comes to carrying from Gag to Karfeif to Chatzin. That Be'ir, if you find it in the city, Eruv Eruv. If you find it in the city. Oh, now another nuance. There's so many Gevaldika details. When do you think you have to find the key? Stam. You would think you have to find the key. You have to find the key on by Ben Hashmoshes. Says Toisvis, the second Toisvis, Be'ir Eruv Eruv. Says Toisvis that not only is the Eruv an Eruv, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you find it during the Zman that you actually need to have the Eruv Tchumen, no. Even if you find the key later in Shabbos, I'm reading inside the little Tosfos, wow. It retroactively validates the Eruv. This is Gavaldik. Let's go back in the Gemara. But besada ein Eruv Eruv. But besada ein Eruv Eruv. And now the Gemara explains the way we are. The Tosefta works with the Mishnah. And the reason why Be'ir Eruv Eruv, Be'ir, just to know, normally you think in the city means Rishus Harabim. No, not here. Be'ir means that you find it, I don't know, in a mavoi, you find the key in a place that according to Rab Shimon, you can carry it all the way to the closet. Because he holds like this Rab Shimon that holds Echad Gagois Vechad Chatzeris Vechad Kapifois, Rishus Achasim Lekelam Shushav Subitoichan. And indeed, this key was not in a home when Ben Hashmoshes came, but Basade, but if you find it in the Rishus Harabim, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you have this girsa, that the Bach takes out, this Kerabanan is referring to another Machlokes Rab Shimon and Abar, another one. And just because Rabbi Eliezer goes like Rab Shimon in one, it doesn't force him to go like Rab Shimon in all. What's the other Machlokes? What does one do if you find tefillin out there, even on Shabbos? What do you do? What do you do with the tefillin? So remember, midoiraisa, you can carry anything less than daladamas. In the Rabbanan, they were afraid if you're going to start carrying and pausing every dollar less pachos midaladamas, you might forget and give one walk akira v'hanacha daladamas, not less than daladamas. The Rav Shimon holds that when there's tefillin lost, you don't have to wear it, which is what the Rabbanan solution. No, you can carry it pachos. So since an eruv, that's the link, is also, let's go only l'tzorech mitzvah. If Rabbi Eliezer would have held also like the Rab Shimon by tefillin, he would have said that even if you find it in a Rishus Harabim, so what? Carry the key, pachas midal adams. But so the Gemara says no, even though he holds like Rab Shimon, that yes, echad gagos, vechad chatzeres, vechad karpifois, and therefore if you find it be'ir, you are good, but he follows like the Rabbanon, that when it comes to finding tefillin, you can't carry the tefillin, you can't carry the key, pachas midalid. The Bach takes out the girsa because b'chlal, you can't compare apples and oranges. Tefillin is an object of kedusha. So therefore, Rab Shimon was lenient. The key is an object of kedusha, even if an eruv can only be placed lit soirech mitzvah, but still to say that you can carry it, so therefore the whole thing take out. Okay. The problem with all this, which goes, it's obvious, is that it's a big doiche to zetzain our Mishnah only on Yom Tov. All the Mishnayos and ERUVIN never differentiate Shabbos and Yom Tov. So therefore, we're going with approach number 2. All of this is to explain that if you lost the key to the closet, based on the premise, like Tosfos says, we spoke out today, that in very large kalim, a big closet, big means that it holds 40 saw of liquid volume, that it's yesh binyan vestira v'kelim. So the only way you can get to the key, according to the Chachamim, is by breaking the closet. Why would the eruv be an eruv? That's the problem. Says the Gemara v'Rabbi v'Rabbi Yosef Dam Tarvayim. No, hacha b'migdal shel eitz askinan, and it's on Shabbos also. Elomam, yes, let's go on places. We are dafka speaking about a large utensil. But you know what? Even a very large utensil, let's go, that ain't being invested in Caleb. However, if you're going to view that this large closet has a din of a structure, has a din of a building, has a din of an oil, by an oil, that's the whole ikir din of being invested, was by the Mishkan, was by an oil. The MERCAVA, which is the Tanach, as large as the keli is, we always apply the klal, that the aim, it's called a keli. And the aim being in the kelim, the aim state of a kelim, you can break it. You can break it. Now, are we saying that you can break it even on a rabbinic level? Could be. Again, we're going to see back and forth in between the lines whether our Mishnah can follow the Rabbanan, which is ideal, that will hold that there is shmuz bein hashmashas for Erev Tchumen, or does it have to follow Rebbe? We can so far learn that ain't being in Bekelim, even the Rabbanan. Guys, just to be aware that we nowadays, we paskin, we behave very much on this concept of ain't being invested in Bekelim. Like I mentioned, we open up packages, as long as there's a kilkel, you're not creating a keli, we have no problem. However, the MERCAVA, Rabbi Eliezer holds that the moment it's that big means it holds 40 saw, it has a din of an oil. An oil means you can't call it a building. You can't call it a building because it's not affixed in the ground. But it's not a keli. Oil doesn't mean a covering for tumas oil. Oil means it's a structure. A structure has been invested in. And now that they made that, Rabbi Yosef, we're going to show you of Aliyah that there is taka machlekes tanoim elsewhere, whether a very large structure, a very large migdal, whether it has a din of a keli or a din of an oil. But look at the Hanitanoy, Ditram, as Zav, which is an Av, if he touches something that's susceptible to Tumah, he's metamed. But not only is he metamed b'mago, not only is he metamed b'maso, but if he even only moves something without touching it, he's wearing gloves, Rashi says here, or the Zav is using a pshute klei, he's taking a ruler, which doesn't become tamei because the Zav is holding it. That's completely taught, pshute klei. But with the ruler, he moves another item, he moves it, it becomes tamei. He says the Mishnah, hikish al gabe shiva teven amidol. There's a large, again, here you have a large carriage, crate, or closet, large. And hikish means he hits it. Now, did it move? L'chayda means he hit it and it gave a move. So the Tanach says it's tamei. That's the pshat hesed zav. However, Rabbi Nechemia and Shimon say it's taught. Now, why would it be taught? He moved it. So my love, that the MERCAVA, which is the Chacham, the Tanach, that they hold that it's tamei. Why not? It has a din of a keli. A keli is subject to tumah zav. However, Rabbi Nechemia and Shimon, that would make a lot of sense. He moved it. Why is it done? Because since it's so large, it has the status of a oil. That's beautiful because an oil, which is a building, is not subject to tumah zav. So just like l'choura, you see a machlekes over there in Mesechtes Zavim, the same will be the underlying machlekes here in the ERUVIN. Says the Gemara against Rabba and against Rabbi Yosef, Amar Abaya to his teacher. The Tizbera, is this a logic? No, it can't be. You didn't understand Pshat over there. Because the Hatanya, first of all, we learned again a Braisa elaborating this Mishnah that oil, the Nisa Tamei, that if a Zav moves an oil, it says clear. If a Zav moves an oil, why would he move an oil? Because it's not a building. An oil can be an oil. Think about a tent that you would build, that I would build. How good do we know how to anchor something in the ground? You can make an oil and not anchor it that well. So the Braisa says, if it moved, I don't care that you call it an oil. I don't care that it was anchored enough that the Ruach Mitsuya, it's not going to get blown away. If it's not mamash fixed, it moved, it's tamei. And on the other hand, in Braisa, if you have a keli, but the keli is so heavy that even though the Zav hit it, the Einoi Nisan, if it didn't move, it started. So first of all, you see b'feidish that we don't say that if it has an oil, it's not subject to Tumas Hesed Zav. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Number one. Number two, it says in the Sefer of the Mishnah Zavim, the Sefer doesn't go to the Braisa. And the Imhoy and the Soitim, clearly it says that if they move, they're tamei. In other words, when Nechemia and Shimon were metired, they were only metired because it didn't move. And therefore, before we go on, we refuted Rabba and Rabbi Yosef's tenets. When they want to link it to Zavin, it's not true. So according to Abaya, really, you need to have a new answer. We don't like the answer we started yesterday because we don't want to Zetz in the Mishnah B'Yontav. But before we get there, now we have to understand the Mishnah and Zavim. So what's Taka the Machloikas? If even an oil is subject to Hesed Zav, why would they be Matayim? So the Gemara says Gavaldik. And let's go further, Zaklau, that this is what the Mishnah says, that Nisad Machmas Koichoi, that if something moved from the direct koyach of a Zav, not touch, koyach means that he takes a ruler and he moves something with it, or even gloves. However, the Mishnah says that if machmas ra'ada, if the zav bangs the ground, he causes the ground to tremble, and that trembling of the ground moves an article. That's called in halacha koyach koychay, or in English it's called indirect force. Then you're taught. Bottom line is that oil is subject to tumah. Oil doesn't have a status of a non-subject. So there's no raya at all from zavim. Elo Amar Rabbi in explaining the Mishnah and Zavim, the Kula Alma Hesed, which comes machmas koichoi, even an oil is tummy. And as we mentioned in the Mishnah, if he moved something but it came indirectly, machmas ra'ada, that means he shook the ground and then the ground's trembling moved something. Everyone holds its thought. The machloikis in the Mishnah and Zavim is v'hachim ra'ada machmas koichoi askin. It's a very unusual case. He hit a migdal. He hit a migdal. But the migdal gets into it. It shook, but it didn't leave its place. Is that called movement? Is movement called moving if you're shuckling Shmona Esrei? You're not going anywhere. You're not moving anywhere. The Tanach holds, yes, that's called Hesed. It shook. However, Umar Sava goes to both Rabbi Nechem and Rab Shimon, that lo yav Hesed. And bottom line is, no link from there to here. So now the Gemara wants to know, Masnisan, our Mishnah, Erev and Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, back to the original question, is, why would the Tanach hold that if you lost the key, the Erev was an Erev? So now we have the third approach, Abaya and Rava, the Omri Tarvaya, that b'manoil uketir b'misna askina. We're speaking about a lock, and the issue was not that you lost the key, but the lock was tied with a rope. And the only way that you will be able to unlock the lock is by cutting the rope. Misna means, like Rashi says, not a little rope that you can rip with your hands. It's a rope. It's a rope that you need a knife to cut the rope. And therefore, so what? How does that resolve? And you have a knife. The question is, are you allowed to be metaltil, a knife, to cut the rope? Why would you not be allowed? Guys, let's go back to the Masechta Shabbos. If you remember, there was a sheet of Rab Nechemia, which is the most chamur, that says a keli can only be used for the purpose for which it was made. Knives were not made to cut ropes. Knives were made for cutting a steak. And hold on, and even if we're going to follow Shitas Rebbe, this is important, even if we're going to follow Shitas Rebbe, that holds, that anything that's only usher because of Shvus, you are allowed to do Ben Hashmashos for the laws of Eruv Tchumen. So if you remember, when we introduced this subject 3 days ago, we said in the intro, don't understand Pshat and Rebbe that it's across the board, that you can always violate the Rabbanan's Ben Hashmashos. So it's not called a violation, no. It's linked to a Tzorech Mitzvah. There has to be a link to Eruv Tchumen. When you violate a Shvus and right away you get the Eruv, Rebbe says you can do it. It doesn't emasculate, it doesn't take away your koyach of using the Eruv Tchumen. But if you are violating a Shvus, but it's one step before you get the Eruv, which will be in our case, like taking out the bricks, that is to get to the Eruv. That was the first topic. Picking up a knife, if the knife is muktzah, you're picking up the knife, says the Sfas Emes, before you're cutting the rope, before you're getting the Eruv. It's so removed from getting the Eruv, even Rebbe will hold that there is a shvus, this type of shvus of Ben Hashmashos. Let's read it inside. Tanach Amasovan, Loket Rabbi Yosi, the Amar, Kol, HaKelim, Netalam B'Shabbos, even if something was made for something else, as long as there's no muktzah machmas chesra and kiss, if you remember, then you can move it. Chutz mi masarag, a large saw, the owner doesn't want you to use the saw for anything else. So that's taka muktzah. Or the yasei shel machresha, the plow, the coulter, the knife that goes into the ground, that's an expensive piece of equipment. That's muktzah machmas chesed and kis. But anything else, if I have a knife, even though the knife was made for one usage, I can use it to cut a rope. Not going to ruin the knife. However, Rabbi Eliezer will hold like the Tanach of Nehemiah the Amma that even a clothing, even a talus, even a spoon, even a tarba, so therefore, since it's muktzah to take a knife to cut the rope to get into the lock, to get into the eruv, therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says that the eruv. Okay, here we start the sugya of Safek and Chazak. Now, begins the Mishnah. Nizgalgal chutz l'tchum. You, before this man of the eruv, the eruv has to be there by Bein Hashmoshes. Before Bein Hashmoshes, the eruv was placed in the correct place, which is within 2,000 amas from you. But if you want to extend the max, if you want to get your money's worth for the eruv, you put the eruv at the edge. You put the eruv at Amma 1999. Good. So now you can go till the eruv, and also you can count your Tchum Shabbos from your eruv. But what happened was the wind blew, or there was an earthquake, I don't care how, an animal, it rolled outside its Tchum. Or Nafal Olav Hagal, something, a building collapsed, and now it's under rubble. And as we'll learn, you can't get to it halachically. Or it got burnt, Bigash, it's not there. Or Truma Vinit Mace. The Gemara will explain why the Mishnah has to give all these examples, but they share one commonality. So first of all, the rule is, if this happened not before Bein Hashmoshes, then for sure in eruv. On the other hand, if it happened only after it says Mishach HaShecha, the eruv was in the right place and kosher during Bein Hashmoshes, then Kol Alma is eruv. The question is, Safek, if you have a doubt. Now, a very important detail, it's not Safek Hiniach. Safek Hiniach means you don't even know if it was ever there. That's a much worse doubt. Here, the Mishnah is giving cases where we know it was placed. And therefore, we have what we have theoretically an instrument called Chazaka de Me'ekara. It was placed before Bein Hashmoshes. After it got dark, you discovered it's no longer valid. You have to determine halachically when did it become invalid. Machloikas Tanoi. Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda hold that we have to be machmer both ways. Guys, in lahavdil to Torah, in Goyish, there's a lashon, you're stuck between the rock and a hard place. The lashon of Chazal for this is chamor gamol. I love the lashon. We speak Akidin. Chamor gamol means that there is a donkey driver and there's a camel driver. And imagine if you are tied to the donkey driver and you're tied to the camel driver and they're both going in opposite directions. You're stuck, you're trapped. What's a chamor gamol? Guys, if whoever can watch this, right? This is where you're at, Begashmias. If you would not put a native tchum and you measure the 2,000 amas from here, you place the eruv over here. What did you gain? You gained is that if this eruv was valid, then you count the 2,000 amas from here. Obviously, like we mentioned, you must place the eruv Begashmias within 2,000 amas from where you are. Now we have a doubt whether the eruv is valid or not. So now we have a doubt whether we're taking Shabbos from my chitas or you're taking Shabbos from the mug. So you know what chamar gamol means? You have to be machmer both ways. You can basically only carry between the chitas and the mug. Because if you would not place an eruv, then you would be allowed to go 2,000 amas to the other side of where you physically are. But you can't do that because maybe the eruv was valid. And if the eruv was valid, you only have 2,000 amas from the eruv. Mitzat Sheni, to say that you can go further from the eruv, maybe the eruv was not valid, and all you have is the eruv from where you physically are. So you're stuck in between. The only place that you can walk is a place that's both within your physical location and within the eruv, because Safek l'chumra. However, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon Oimrim, no, Safek eruv kosher, meaning we rely on the eruv. And Omer Rabbi Yossi, I'll prove to you that I'm right from testimony that Avtulmus testified in the name of the 5 elders. We have a lot of times the Chamisha Zakenim, sometimes the Chamisha Zakenim from Dorim. Who were they? Were they the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva? Are these the same? That's a big topic, but 5 Zakenim that they testified al Safek eruv that it's kosher. Okay, let's start. So first of all, this Galgal Chutz L'chum, a few technical concepts. When we mention that I physically am here, and I placed the eruv by 1999. And at some point, the eruv was blown away further. So don't say further means 2001 amas. No, no. Because if my eruv would have not been blown away, right? So now my Shabbos is from my eruv. From where do you measure 2,000 amas? Not from where the food is. You always first have 4 amas. You always have first 4. And from outside the 4 amas, then, so let's say I placed my eruv 1999.9 away from where I am. And now it blew away only 1 amma. It's not a problem. Because it's 2,000 plus something away from me. It doesn't matter. Blown away means that it left the 4 amas from where you placed the eruv, says the Gemara. This galgal chutz l'tchum of the eruv, of the 2,000 amas from where you physically are, says Rabbi Nishgenoi. Leishonu eloshen is galgal chutz la'arba amas from the food, from the eruv. But if it rolled away within the 4 amas from where you placed it, even though physically that location now is a little bit more than 2,000 amas from where you are, no problem, because hanois and eruva yesh ledaladas. Okay, now naflo of a gal. So the Mishnah says if it fell during daytime, if it was covered in rubble before ben hashmoshes, then there's no suffix. Then it's not valid. Question is why? If you could take it on a biblical level, because I know that rocks are muksa. But again, we're going to try, see, is it only l'Rabbanan? Is it also l'Rebbe? I know that we already said that one Mishnah is Rebbe, the next Mishnah is the Chachamim. We're going to try to make it work l'kula alma. It'll be a lot better. It's already a doichik. Rebbe, Rabbanan, says the Gemara, Leiva masnisn loike Rebbe. The Rebbe, he says, called Avashum Shum Shvus, like those of Ashmashas. And moving stones is muksa, and which would mean is it true that according to Rebbe, I would not have a problem if it's buried under rubble? Says the Gemara, no, our Mishnah can go according to Rebbe. It's not so simple. Sometimes we say that moving a rock is only muksa. But, we're speaking about, you know what type of rubble fell on top of your eruv, that you need a mara v'chatzina, you need instruments like a hoe, like picks, to be able to excavate. You have to push it, excavate it. Excavating, digging, either it's binyan, if it's in a building, or it's chodesh. That's the Isur D'Oraisa. That will be the case in the Mishnah. Finished. Okay, so therefore, the Mishnah can go l'kula alma. Now we have to establish, before we get into the lamdas of chazaka and a suffix, this is gavaldik. Why did the Mishnah give 4 cases? So the Gemara is breaking it down into the first 2 and to the last 2. The first 2 was, it got blown away, physically it's there, or it got covered by rubble. But the Tana only misgalgo, I would argue that the reason why we cannot count that aid of Mishum Delay Segabe, because it's outside the Tchum. It's outside the Tchum. Maybe even since it's there, it's within the Tchum, the Isagabe, I know that you can't actually get it, but how many times did we learn you don't have to actually get it? We can say you potentially should get it. Maybe I would argue, and in reverse, if the Tana only would have thought it in that if a rubble fell in it, you cannot rely on that eruv, that's because it's covered. And as we just explained, then the only way to get to it is to violate the biblical either boina or chadisha, because you need instruments to excavate it. The first white line and the 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. But you would argue that if it got blown away, especially based on the Tosfos that we learned today, the second Tosfos in this Amid, you know, just like the wind blew it here, the wind can blow it back. Why are you invalidating it? Why don't I say that since it's not covered by anything, maybe maybe a new wind will come going in the opposite direction, and it's going to blow it back. And maybe since there is such a potential, even now it's good. Neither of these cases, if you know this happened before Ben Hashmoshes, the Eid of Toivish. The last line of the Amid, then the Mishnah gave another 2 examples. Either it got burned, or the truma that was used for an Eid became tummy. Lama li tana nisraf. Why did I need this new case of getting burned? Naflamet hey on the base, says the Gemara. What does Rabbi Yossi say? Rabbi Yossi says, even though burnt means it's not physically here, there's nothing here, that even though there's nothing here right now, Rabbi Yossi says, you have a doubt? You know that it was placed correct. There's no suffix hiniach. It was hiniach. Now it's not here. Chazaka de me'ekara is extended to as much as you could, even though now it's b'chlal not here. And when it mays, the reason why the Mishnah gives the final case that it became tamei is the opposite, is to be magdiya the koyach of Rav Meir, that even though it's yeshnoi ba'olam, it's here, and it's within the tchum. And there is a chazaka me'ikara. You know that it began to hoira. Rav Meir says, I don't care. If now it's tamei, you got to doubt. And a doubt, by ERUVIN, you got to be machmer. Chamor gamol. That doesn't work. There's so much you should know. Many times, whenever we have a sugya about sofek and chazaka, we're going to bring mikvois. Mikvois is filled with this concept. And here's the Mishnah mikvois. He went into the mikvah. Not sofek whether he went into the mikvah. That's a different type of sofek. Like we mentioned, sofek hiniach is a worse sofek. He went into a body of waters. But there is a sofek tavel, sofek li tavel, which means lamashal. There might have been something that created a chatzitza. He went under the water. We know that. We don't know whether it was considered halachically a tefillah, or even if we know for sure that there was no chatzitza, a tefillah tavel, but we don't know whether the mikvah had 40 saw. Sofek tavel barbaim saw, sofek barbaim saw, or there were two mikvahs. One for sure yesh barbaim saw. One adjacent for sure does not have 40 saw. He went into the mikvah. We have a sofek. Says the Mishnah. And guys, the premise of the kasha is that Stam Mishnah is Meir. Says the Mishnah, Sveikoi Tomei. However, which, by the way, that would be great, right? He's Machmer. No, says the Mishnah, only when the tumah for which the person has to go into the mikveh is called a tumah chamura. Simple, don't get nervous. Tumah chamura means he's tamei midoiraisa. Aval the tumah kala, but if he's only tamei midrabanan. And here, guys, a quick chazara of some of the shmoina asar davar that we learn in Masechta Shabbos. For example, shachal oichalim tameim on a biblical level. Oichel doesn't have the koyach to be matama person. But if a person ate chatzi pras, remember that, since the Chachamim were afraid that at the time that you're eating, you might put tumah in your mouth, so they made out takana that you become tum in the level of a sheni. Similarly, v'shasamashkin tameim, or the other tumah midrabanan, that if you're going to the mikvah to remove a tumah da'oiraisa, then you may not take a bath afterwards, nor take a shower afterwards. Why? Because people might look and think that this is the final step of Tara, so they put upon you again a tuma midrabanan, the habarei sheviru b'mayim she'uvin, right? That's a shower. I'm sorry, you went into mayim she'uvin bath. In all of these cases, when you're only talking midrabanan and then we are a lip oil, so the din is, and now, or we are a lip oil, and now again the same suffix. Suffix, tavel, suffix, like tavel. Or rafilu tavel, suffix, tavel, barbaim saw, suffix, like tavel, or Ventura mikvahs, one had 40 saw, one did not have 40 saw, and you went into one of them, and ve'ena yodea, which one you went. In all of these cases, fake tahar. So now we have a contradiction. What's the stira? Rav Meir holds. Safek by a Rabbanon, we say your tar. Why do we say your tar? Why do we say your tar? Because we can be lenient. Says the and Abyoisi Metame. Now, by the way, this will continue, God willing, tomorrow. Not only is this a kasha against Rav Meir, but you have a kasha now Rav Yosi. Because in our Mishnah, Rav Yosi is the one that's lenient. Here, Rav Yosi is the one that's stringent. Let's leave Rabbi Yossi for tomorrow. They have a kasha Rav Meir. Now, but the kasha, let's appreciate it, is only based on the fact that the Mishnah Mikvois says that Rav Meir holds Sveikoi Tar by the Rabbanan. The kasha is based on the premise that an Eruv is only needed in the Rabbanan. So the Gemara has an answer. I'll tell you. Rav Meir, Tchumen Doiraiseninu. By the way, Rav Meir was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva holds that even the 2,000 Amma Tchum is Mide Oiraisa, as we'll learn later in the Masechta. Oh, boop, fakir, perfect. By a Doiraisa, you're Machmer. Asks the Gemara, how can you tell me that Rav Meir holds Tchum and Doiraisa? It won't fit. Oh, Tanan. But we learned in a Mishnah here in Daf Nun Ches, and the Mishnah is like this. Let me say it out by heart, that when you are measuring the 2,000 amas, what happens if, they would use ropes that had the max length of 50 amas to get to the 2,000 amas. The ropes that were longer were already considered not that accurate. You might schlep it too much. You might not schlep it too much, too loose, too tight, 50 amas. Now, what happens if I am measuring, but I'm going over a mound or in a valley? So do I have to put the rope on the mound or valley, which will ultimately bring my location closer to me? It's chamur. Or are we allowed to make believe as if it's flat? That's called to be mavliyah. And the din is by eruv chumen that it's in English. It's called you span it. And there were techniques of doing this. So if there's a mound, all I need to do is instead of me putting it on the ground, if the mound is only not that tall, short, I pick it up. So it goes straight. So I get more in my 2,000 amas. Now I can only span it by picking it up or putting it down if the mount or the valley is very little. What happens is so first of all, the Mishnah says you can span it. Now what happens if the mountain is huge and you can't simply lift it? The physically. So says the Mishnah that Bezu Amar Rebbe Doistoi Bar Yanai in the name of Rav Meir, that Rav Meir says that Rav Meir heard Shemekadrin Baharim, that you can pierce mountains. There's a mathematical formula that teaches you how to completely discount the mountain or the valley, even though you're not physically using your rope, and figure out Keilu the rope is piercing going through the mountain. That's meaning you never need to measure the mound or the valley itself. Now, says the Gemara, Rav Meir says it, right? Are we allowed to be mavliya? And when you can't physically be mavliya, you can't span it, can you make this cheshbon and figure out it's 2,000 amas? Can you pierce the mountains? How can that be? Clearly, ein mekadrin, not by Ari Miklat. Do you know that the din of an Ari Miklat is that if the Zajac is outside the physical Ari Miklat, but if the Zajac is still within the Tchum, which is 2,000 amas from the Ari Miklat, he's protected. And there we say, what is that Tchum? 2,000 amas. The Torah says at the Fedish, how do you measure the 2,000 amas? By physically putting a rope, and you have to include the crevices. You have to include the mountains. Because the din of Ari Miklat is a din d'oraisa. Likewise, if someone is found murdered outside a city and you don't know who the murderer is, so the obligation of kapara falls on the closest city, and you have to measure, nothing to do with 2,000 amas. But when you measure, you're not mekadrin. You have to actually measure, including the space of the ups and of the downs. For all of this, was that mean? That if the measurement is b'shel Torah, you can't be mekader. The fact that you could be mekader by tchumen is araya, and Rav Meir is saying that Rav Meir holds that tchumen is midrabanan. So now we're back to the stira. If tchumen is midrabanan in the mikvah, in the Mishnah mikvahs, Rabbi Meir holds that you're lenient, and then I'm in ERUVIN is machmer. So it says the Gemara loy kashem. Ha, the day, ha means our Mishnah, Rav Meir is machmer, chamor, gamol. Rav Meir himself does hold like Rabbi Akiva, that holds that Tumas is d'oraisa, and you're machmer. It fits with mikvahs. If the Tumas is d'oraisa, you have a suffix tummy. Ha, but when it comes to the piercing of the tchum, what did he say? Shomati shemekadren boharin. He was not quoting his shita, but the Rabbi, his Rebbe. Oh, hold on, isn't his Rebbe Rabbi Akiva? No. If you remember, Daf Yud Gimel, we learned that he had two teachers. He had Rabbi Akiva, he had Rabbi Shmuel. He's his other Rebbe. And Daikanami, the fact that it says the Tani Bezu Amar Abdusai Bariani Mishum Rav Meir. Look at the word Shomati. Shomati means gehert. Not that I subscribe to it. Shomati shemekadrin baharim by eruv tchumen for Shabbos, for ERUVIN, is a raya that's takanara shita shmami, no? Okay, so Atkan, it's good, right? He holds that ERUVIN is d'oraisa, and like in mikvahs, by any Safek Doiraisa, you don't say Chazaka. You can't, you have to, you remain with the doubt. You're Machmir by Tuma, here Chamar Gamo. Frek the Gemara, Rami Doiraisa, Ad Doiraisa, lit of me. No, it's not true that, oh, he's always Machmir, the Tanan. We have your Mishnah in Tarois, it's a simple case. A person went to sleep, and there were two people in the same bed, Reuven and Shimon. By the way, we should not do that. But okay, and tomorrow, the next morning, Shimon left nicht. And you, Reuven, know, you remember that during the night, you knocked Shimon, you touched him. You just don't know when he died. Okay? Now you can, there's so many, you have to just work out the technicality, because if they're sleeping under an oil, whether he touched him or not, he's an Av. It's in a case where only if he touched him after he died, he'll become Tamei on that higher level, whatever that case is. So the Mishnah says, Noga be'echad b'layla, and ve'eino yodeya im chayim meis. Okay, let me just take out the same bed. Let's go in a case they're not even better. No, make a scenario where if he didn't touch him, he's b'chlal not Tamei. But ulamachar hishkim b'motzayim meis. Now, when he went to sleep, Reuven went to sleep, he was tahar. The chazaka me'ikara was, he was tahar. If he touched him, that's a tumah d'oraisa. He would become tamei. Says Rabbi Meir, he's tahar. We use chazaka me'ikara to resolve the suffix. The chachamim say metamin. Why? Shekol hatumais kishas mitziyasan. Now the Shimon is dead. For sure there was a touch. So if I can't, now you have to pass that he's tamei. So we got a problem in Rav Meir. Says the Gemara, Omar Rab Yirmiyah. Therefore, it must be, now that we established that Rabbi Meir, even by a suffix de oiraisa, will rely on chazaka de meikara. So why in our Mishnah Chamar Gamo, Shohaya all of Sheretz Kol Ben Hashmashas? It's because we don't have really a doubt. Let's speak about the case of Tuma. It's not we have a suffix. We don't have a suffix. There was a sheretz on the eruv throughout Ben Hashmashas. Now, how can that even be? How can that even be? We'll speak it out in a moment. The whole case of the Mishnah is a suffix. The Gemara words that Elyahu Bahal Lemed Rabbi Yossi suffix eruv kasher. So just for the kids that I know it's getting late, guys, don't forget one nakuda. When is Ben Hashmashas? And actually, Rabbi Yossi is the one that holds. Remember the brachas of base that Ben Hashmashas is keher of ayin. And we already learned together that Rabbi Yossi's Ben Hashmashas is after Rabbi Yehuda's Ben Hashmashas. So really this, to appreciate better the Havamina, the Maskana, you have to know when Ben Hashmashas is. So bottom line is that cannot be the case, because if it would be a case where Ben Hashmashas, you know the Truma was Tamei, what's the Machlokes? So Rabbi Yossi, here's the Nekuda. Our Mishnah is B'shtei Kitei Eida Maskinon. The suffix is coming about not by us simply not knowing, because if we have a suffix, even a suffix doiraisa, we established that's where we're up to right now. That's the case of the Mishnah in Taharis. Suffix naga, suffix whether he was living or dead. But I've made his mitayr. Why is it made mitayr? Because even when you have a suffix doiraisa, we use chazaka b'me'ikara to say that the way it was, he was tahar. Schlep it as long as it's possible that he touched him when he was still, when the Shimon was still alive. But there's one thing: a chazaka can never go against Adam. But our Mishnah is a suffix, so explains the Gemara. It's a suffix of two kitei Adam. One of them says, one group says that they saw how the truma became tamei miba oid yoin. The other two Adam say that the truma became tamei only after it got dark. And Rashi, if you beautifully explains. How do you view a case where the basin has two opposite groups of Adam? There are two ways of looking at it. Either they both cancel each other out, so there's no Adam, or they both exist. You have contradictory Adam. This is the nafkamina. If you say pshat when you have two kitei Adam that they both cancel each other, they don't exist halachically. If that would have been the case, Rav Meir would have been lenient. Because yes, Rav Meir, even by a doiraisa, I'm going to get back to the mikvah. We're not done with the sugi yet. But we're in the middle of the sugya. That Rav Meir will even by a doiraisa chazaka de meikara. But since Rav Meir learns pshat by two shnei kitei Adam, that they are both existing, even though you can't paskin like one because you have the other. But now a chazaka becomes completely inconsequential because a chazaka is never taken into account if it's going against Edom. The fact that we know that it was placed before, and when you place it, it was started, who cares? There are two Edom that are saying that it became Tamei Mi'ba'od Yoim. So since you don't have a chazaka, now you have a suffix, you got to be machmir. Rabbi Yossi holds, that's the way Rashi says, that the two Kitei Edom cancel themselves out. And therefore, we use the rule that when you have a suffix, when you have a chazaka, the me'ikara, it resolves the suffix. And therefore, Rabbi Yossi says in the Mishnah, suffix Edom is kosher, a lot more, God willing, to be continued. Gewaldig. Good. Why do we have to tie? We have to tie up. We have to still tie up a lot of things over here because if Rav Meir holds that chazaka the mikvah is established, why is it that by mikvahs, why was he machmer? And the answer is, I mean, obviously, no, it's not even a kasha because by a mikvah, why was the chazaka meikara? Okay, by a mikvah, the chazaka meikara. It was problematic. You want to say he resolved it? There's no problem over there at all. There's no chazaka meikara. In our Mishnah, the chazaka meikara is that the Eruv was an Eruv. That's the way you reconcile that.
Thank you.